All right, welcome back into the RotoViz Best Ball Show. I'm Blair Andrews. Excited to be joined today by Ben Gretch. Ben, you and I have done some managed leagues together with the other ship chasing guys, but I don't know that we've done a ton of best ball drafts together. Maybe not even ever. So this will be exciting.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Sean mentioned on stealing bananas. We should just jump right into it. What's funny is when we do the ship chasing stuff, you and I seem to be pretty aligned. We typically are like 2 votes. Sometimes we get outvoted by Pat, Pete, and Hassan, the contingent of our 3 other co-managers in our Penta five-way drafts. But there's one player that we were disagreeing on a little bit that Sean mentioned, which was Tyreek Hill. I have him ranked like pretty high, and he said you have him pretty low. So we got to make sure to talk about him. But yeah, no, I think we're going to have a good time to drafting this team because we do tend to align, I think, on the types of ways. I mean, we're all in the RotoViz space and in a lot of these spaces similar, but even within that, where we would go in the micro decisions and the micro structural concepts within zero RB and those types of builds, I think you and I tend to align pretty closely. So that's going to be fun.
Yeah, definitely. It'll be fun to get into some of these discussions about guys that we might have some small disagreements on. I think that's always something to, we can hash out. As you're doing these drafts, my rankings are a little bit different than ADP in the first round, but a lot of the time I'll end up just kind of ignoring my rankings in the first round because I don't want to be overexposed to some of my guys. How many rounds into a draft are you willing to take a guy that you might not have ranked as high?
That's how I am in the first round. So you're asking, like, at what point do I start to like reach on guys? Yeah,
right. Like
it depends. It depends on the profile. It's a good question. I was doing a lot of it with Chris Olave in the pre-draft range. Like, so right away, I was taking him all through the second round when he was going in the third in the pre-draft area, but now he's going in the second. So part of that was me saying, like, I didn't love the second round. I think you could do it right away in the second round because the second round is a really unique round this year. And you can poke holes in a lot of the profiles. You can poke holes in the running backs, certainly outside the big 3, top 3 names that I think should be everyone's top 3 running backs, basically. And then there's a pretty big teardrop, and I think that's why we see so many wide receivers coming up, is we just don't have as many elite running backs right now. And then in that second round, a lot of those receivers, especially towards the back half, are in spots that, I mean, we love the talent, but you have, as much as I don't want to be projections focused, you do have to be aware of the fact that, like, there's only one ball on some of these teams, right? Like both the Niners guys going there in an offense that also has the 101 by ADP, Christian McCaffrey, and has George Kittle as well. Both the Texans guys go there, and Tank Dell's going at the 3-4 turn. And Dalton Schultz is still a reasonably high rated tight end, and the running back goes high. And like, that's an offense that is, going to be a little bit concentrated. DJ Moore is still going at the 2-3 turn in an offense that has since added, he was going there before they traded for Keenan Allen and drafted Rome Odunze. It's kind of weird that he's still going that high. So you can't really make volume-based arguments to push those guys up. And so I think you can start to take swings on whoever you like in that range. We're already on the clock here.
Yeah. I mean, Justin Jefferson falling this far is always something that I'm happy to scoop up that value. So let's go ahead and do that. Yeah,
Amon-Ra goes 105, Puka goes 106, and we get Jefferson at 107. I don't think it's can't look a gift horse in the mouth on that one, I think.
Exactly. So yeah, we're at the 107. Sean was telling me when he drafts, he seems like he's always getting 10, 11, 12 in all of his picks. Have you done a lot from the middle?
I've been drafting
like to be in this season.
I like to be in the front. You get good players. And I've been getting a lot of early picks, and Sean mentioned that he and I just did 3 drafts yesterday that'll be coming out on Stealing Bananas, or I guess 2 days ago now. And we did get 3 top 5 draft slots. So it was like 3 of the first ones that he's gotten. And so we did get to build some from that side, and people get to listen to those that are listening to the Stealing Bananas podcast. I do like the front, both because the top 5-ish, top 6 tier. It's a little bit of a vague break where the tier breaks. I mean, I think you can have some real concerns about Jefferson at this point. So maybe it's just a top 4. I actually think Bijan Robinson's a really interesting like ceiling play if you wanted to go running back early, but structurally that's so tough. But I think he should be knocking on the door of the top 5. But anyway, I think there's some really intriguing top 5-ish profiles that it's a little trickier in the back of the first round, although I think Garrett Wilson probably is undervalued. This is an interesting draft win right now, by the way. Brandon Ayuk goes 110. Deebo Samuel goes 203. Somebody stacking up the Niners.
Definitely interesting. We're back on the clock. We got some running backs at the top of the rankings. These are mine and Sean's kind of consensus rankings. What are you thinking here?
I could take either of those running backs, but I do think structurally it gets tricky. Both Nico and Neighbors would be a guy that I was thinking of when I was talking about people you can pull up into the second round because it is a tricky range. Let's go Nico.
Let's do it.
I think the wide receiver start is a lot easier to build out of. You can get better prices on Kyron. Jonathan Taylor would have been, I think, the running back pick for me there.
Interesting.
From an ADP value standpoint, and I think he's a bet on Anthony Richardson really improving the rushing efficiency of the whole offense, and then leading the league in rushing yards. I think there's going to be a limited number of receiving opportunities for him, right? But the potential for him in a half PPR format to run for 2,000 yards and 15 touchdowns is the exciting element, I guess. But yeah, it's I think if you pick from the front, just to finish that last slide, if you pick from the front, you get those great names, and then this area is so flat in the second round, and it really starts at the beginning of the second round that is really flat, that you don't really get a drop off in the second round, and then I think you also get an advantage in the third because you can get like Malik Neighbors in the early third, who arguably could be going anywhere in the second, right? And then by the end of the third, that tier has fallen off. Then you have like DK Metcalf by the middle of the third, even DK Metcalf is like the highest rated ADP receiver at a certain point. And once Achane and Kyron Williams are off the board, you can't even really justify the running. It's like Derrick Henry becomes the running back pick, and Laporta gets pushed up into that gap. And I love the elite tight ends. I do think Laporta's specific profile probably doesn't have the elite ceiling to justify. Like I still have McBride as the tight end 1 personally, because I think he has more ceiling in this season. So anyway, the early picks I think are just such an advantage in the first and third round, but not a disadvantage in the second. It's kind of nice.
Right. Yeah. One thing Sean mentioned when we did a draft last week is we had, I think, the 11 or 12 or something like that. And he mentioned that it feels this year like if you get a pick in the back half, you actually don't get a first round value at all. It's only second round guys at the end of the first. So yeah, definitely getting that early pick can be a big help.
I wonder if he's talking about Garrett Wilson with that as well. I know he's pretty high on Wilson. Wilson's the one that I would argue. I mean, maybe he still should be viewed as sort of a second rounder because we have to bet on Rodgers so much, but Wilson's the one I would argue that in the back half still to me feels like, a first roundish receiver. I think you can put him in the Amon-Ra grouping, basically.
Agreed. Yeah, I think he has Wilson pretty high.
It's kind of like if you're not in position to get Wilson, sometimes Wilson goes 9 and you're like, okay, at 10 or 11, I'm like, okay, I'm going to take an AJ Brown. Like that feels like a second round play for sure.
Exactly. All right. Back on the clock here. By ADP, we were looking at, Pittman, Derrick Henry.
Right. The picks you don't want to make. Pittman, Derrick Henry, DK Metcalf.
Exactly. By ranking, guys like Flowers, ETN, Dell.
You have Flowers at the top. Let's take him because we do have Nico, and it gives a little week 17 correlation there. We could take Tank and start building out like a big Houston thing. But yeah, I think Flowers is fine to be taking here ahead of Pittman and DK Metcalf and those guys who I think are overpriced in the third round.
Right. Yeah. When we kind of teased this or with the thumbnail of this stream, we were talking about the dead zone running backs, because this is a topic that you've written a lot about. Last year, I think we saw the dead zone kind of move a little bit later than it has been, with wide receivers going early again. This year, you do get, I think, some more of those dead zone running backs, but you also have a lot of wide receivers in this range that it's not very fun to be taking. So how are you kind of balancing wide receiver versus running back picks? Are you looking at different positions in these upcoming rounds, or how do you approach that in 2024?
These upcoming rounds, I really like the elite tight ends, and I do think the dead zone has continued to be in the later area than we would maybe have traditionally thought about it, or I was originally writing about it, or whatever. It has shifted back. We've only seen, look at this draft board. We've only seen 9 running backs, I think I'm counting, have gone off the board at this point. We're barreling towards our 4th round pick. It used to be 9 in the first round every single time, right? Like, that's the way fantasy football used to be played. Like, this is the thing that always needs to get emphasized. When Sean wrote the Zero RB article in 2013, I think 11 of the top 12 ADPs were running backs when he wrote that, when we kind of checked back with him and talked to him about that. Yeah. And it used to be that your RB 20 was going before, the middle of the 3rd round. And that's when the dead zone started to hit, was about RB 20. And it was the back, 10 or so projected lead backs of the 32 teams that it's all projected volume, but they're not actually good profiles. Now there's been enough understanding of that, Devin Singletary is a projected lead back, but he goes in the 11th round. Zamir White's going in the 8th round. Like, it's a different world for those weaker projected backs. We're back up. I would go with any of these top 3 guys. I don't know. I could add another receiver. I think going tight end is kind of the way that I lean.
We were just talking about the elite tight end, so let's go ahead and grab one. Maybe a slight reach by ADP, but I do really like Kincaid this year.
Agreed. I think he structurally makes a lot of sense here. And if you don't take him here, he goes. Andrews goes. Sometimes Pitts goes before you get back up in the 5th. And then you're talking about probably pushing up Kittle to make sure you get that structural advantage. I'm totally fine with Kincaid in the middle of the 4th. McBride goes 3 picks ahead of us. He would have been an option as well. But yeah, as we start to get into this range, like ETN just went as the RB10, but we're starting to see quarterbacks come off, tight ends come off. There's just so many fewer running backs going. And I do think that shifts the dead zone down. It's not Travis Etienne necessarily. There's an element to be said about like the way that drafters are buying in, and that isn't just the RB 20 plus thing. That's also a draft range thing, an opportunity cost argument about why that was always a zone in drafts. But I do think right now that from all the research I've done on the profiles that traditionally are the dead zone type profiles are the ones that are like inefficient backs propped up by volume. So it's, Pacheco goes here. I think you can start to make the case on a guy like Pacheco, frankly, who I think is propped up a little bit by the passing game and the way that the teams have to defend the Chiefs, and they're playing a lot of deep safety looks, and they're putting extra DBs on the field, and it makes it easier to run. We know good passing games can help the rushing efficiency of mediocre backs essentially. But the guy that comes to mind immediately is Rachaad White, who goes in like a little bit. It usually goes in the 5th round, and it's like that's a dead zone back right there. Like, that's a guy who was really inefficient last year, got there on volume. He was way worse in points per game rank than he was in total points rank. Like, he was RB6 in half PPR total points, but that's because he played 17 games. He was RB14 in points per game because he wasn't actually very good when you look at the actual points per game. Which that's not a bad rank, but as far as running back scoring goes, for a lot of the ones that are like backups, then get an opportunity and have spike weeks, their averages are always brought down, and so their actual impact isn't reflected in an average. So typically speaking, the RB 14-ish, 15-ish in points per game isn't actually that big of a difference-making player. It's just a cumulative play, and we can't be sure that for the 2nd straight year they won't have somebody else, cough Bucky Irving, cough, that can take some of that work. Last year they didn't have anybody, and that was a big issue for them. And we're right back up. Pitts did make it back. Sometimes I go Pitts 2 tight ends.
Yeah, I don't hate 2 tight ends here. I think for me it's between Worthy and Pitts. So
let's do Worthy, because we do already have the tight end, and I like him a lot in the 5th as well.
All right, yeah, I like Worthy here. We could also take CJ Stroud to go for the Nico Collins stack, but I don't necessarily like like getting a quarterback in the 5th round. So
yeah, structurally, it becomes a lot nicer to get the receiver here because there's a real drop off pretty quick,
right.
and that's the other thing with whether you want to be making the Rachaad White pick, which happens 2 picks after us, or some of these running backs where the dead zone actually is. Like James Cook, I don't think is a traditional dead zone back, but I have a hard time clicking him too, just structurally, because the receivers you have to pass up they put you out of position. And I mean, that starts in the 2nd round. We took Nico over Jonathan Taylor. You take Taylor there, it starts to put you out of position, makes it hard to make the Kincaid pick. And we had a falling Josh Allen value and then a falling CJ Stroud value, but those are not picks that you can really make at quarterback either at that stage, because you do, I think, wide receiver, when they are pushed up this high, you see a pretty big drop off in the 6th, 7th round. By the time you hit the 8th, you better already have 4 minimum, probably 5. Yeah. Sometimes I like to have 6 at that point, right? And then you're in a much better position, because you can still build out a nice running back room after that point. So, sure. And the other position that's really tough to backfill is tight end. And so I, want to be hitting an elite tight end. Sometimes want to be hitting 2 in the first 7 or 8 rounds. So the dead zone to me, very alive and well this year in the concept of opportunity cost, because you do have to give up a lot at wide receiver or tight end to be making those picks. Last year, I thought the optimal structure, a lot of us did, was to actually take some running backs in those traditional dead zone rounds, round 4, round 5, when Breece Hall was going there, ETN, those types of guys. And it was, take a couple early receivers, take some running backs in the dead zone, come back to receiver. And that worked on a lot of teams. I mean, that was a strong structure last year, but I don't think that's the move this year. I don't think you want to be going into the dead zone. That was a 1-year thing.
Yeah, one thing that you have continually emphasized is that when you're talking about the dead zone, it's not really about this ADP range. It's about the kind of running backs that you tend to see going there. So in a year when you have Breece Hall going in the dead zone or in the 5th round or whatever, like he was last year, that doesn't necessarily make him a dead zone back. Okay, was kind of hoping Kittle would make it back to us, but we do have Addison here. Stroud still sitting there.
Yeah, I think it's probably Stroud at this point. We do have the Nico and the Zay Flowers kind of bring back. We can build this week 17 stack. He's now 13 picks past ADP. It's a pretty nice little.
Yeah, I like that call. I'm not usually drafting these elite quarterbacks, but when they fall like this and they fit with your team so well, I think it makes a ton of sense.
13 picks past ADP. That's fun that we didn't take him in the last round, just a couple picks past ADP, and he comes back on. And I agree, Kittle was probably the preferred pick there.
Yeah.
But to get Stroud when you take Nico where we took him, pretty sweet.
Definitely. Seen some pretty interesting quarterback picks with Kyler Murray going in the 4th in this draft. You don't see that too often. Stacked with Marvin Harrison, of course, but still seems like you could have waited a few rounds on that pick. But otherwise I think fairly standard board apart from a few.
Yeah, that was aggressive. And then the drafter who went Ayuk Debo at the 1-2 turn at 10 and 15. But they've followed ADP since. They went Tank, Trey McBride, Terry McLaurin, Kenneth Walker. Those are all very normal picks in the spots they did since. I think they're probably just trying to set up a unique San Francisco stack, because there's not going to be a lot of teams that are going to have both Ayuk and Debo. Although the tricky thing is, like, people can get that at the 2-3 turns sometimes. Like Debo can sometimes slide. I mean, maybe that's harder to get than I think at the 2-3 turn.
I don't know if I don't know if Ayuk gets or Debo gets, well, if you can get both of those guys there.
Yeah.
I've seen those guys going a lot of kind of all over the place, sometimes with Debo ahead of Ayuk even.
But see, this is the range where you start to really talk about, or at least I start to think about the real dead zone. Like Zamir White going 701. He's a dead zone back. He's a guy that's getting projected for a lot of volume because we don't know who else could get the work. And I talked about this recently, but I was looking at my original dead zone piece like this offseason. Somebody brought it up to me. And in the intro, I'm talking about how Alex Collins was that guy for the Ravens that year. He was a top 100 ADP because of projected volume. And it's because nobody could see UDFA Gus Edwards getting 150 rushes, which is how that played out for them.
Right.
We are back up.
We are. Bowers is the top by ranking, but he is probably going to make it back to us if we wanted to go that route. Any of these running backs, I think, would be fine, right?
Yeah. Brooks looks good. What's the top receiver right now?
Top
Chase
receiver.
already went. Oh, I could take Rashee Rice, but
Yeah,
I think he's a
we
really
got
nice
Brooks,
value. That's fine. I think he's a really nice value into the 7th round because I just don't. And Deontay Johnson goes one pick after us. I mean, just to get a 5th receiver that is going to play a lot. So I've taken a lot of Worthy and Rice together because I think the Chiefs receivers overall are mispriced. If you have Kelsey as a 4th round pick now in ADP this year because he's not running as many routes at this stage of his career and all those things, I mean, this is a team that's been number 1 in pass rate over expected 4 or 5 years in a row. Like every season in pass rate over, we know they're going to throw, and we know Patrick Mahomes is hyper efficient. And his receivers actually got a little bit better this year after a tough year last year. I mean, actually a lot better, arguably, with Xavier Worthy and Marquise Brown coming into town. Yeah. I don't know what's going to happen with the Rice suspension and all of that, but I think at a certain point he becomes a pretty intriguing buy on the sense that if the suspension comes out as 2 games, I think he jumps 3 rounds. And this is the only win. You're going to look back on this window and be like, you were able to draft him in the 7th round. That was kind of crazy, you know?
That's a good point. I mean, if you consider kind of his profile apart from the suspension stuff, apart from the off-field stuff, you'd have to think he's like a 2nd rounder this year. So
right. Yeah. He was going the 2-3 turn pre-draft before the wreck. He was going 2-3 turn. And I was arguing he was a value there, that I thought he should be not far behind Puka Nacua. He had a 2+ yards per out run as a rookie in a Patrick Mahomes offense. Didn't run a full route share until week 14. Which is maybe a little bit of a red flag, but the Chiefs have done that with their rookies before, and it's more just his per route numbers then suggested there's a lot of room for him to grow. The other reason I think you can look at it as a favorable thing is by the time he did finally run the full route share week 14, he ran it the rest of the year, which included the final regular season games, but then 4 playoff games. So it ends up being 8 weeks of him playing a full role, including a strong run in the playoffs. He winds up going 1 pick ahead of us in the 8th.
Yeah, that's a bummer.
I'm with you on Brock Bowers, though, as far as we only have the 1 tight end.
When you talk about getting 2 elite tight ends, Bowers feels like the end of a tier for me. I mean, he's going after Njoku, who's still on the board. He's going after Jake Ferguson, Evan Ingram, but I kind of like him ahead of all those guys. So
I like him in that range, certainly ahead of Ferguson. I like Njoku a reasonable amount too.
Yeah,
I like to see your rank on Javonte Williams here, who I think is pretty severely mispriced, and I think a lot of. So if Warren goes, I think he fits really well with Jonathan Brooks because I think Brooks is more of a back-weighted production play coming off the ACL. How much are they really going to use him? Javonte, I think the volume is being misunderstood. He's going to get a lot of targets in that offense.
Yeah, so you're not worried about the guys they've added or McLaughlin or
I'm vaguely worried about it, but I'm more just excited about the Bo Nix fit in the Sean Payton system and the running back targets. If you go back and look at Sean Payton's history, the running back passing is such a core of what he is as a coach. And it wasn't a Russell Wilson thing until last year. Suddenly, Russell Wilson is the quarterback that leads the NFL. And last year, they led the NFL in running back targets with Russell Wilson, which is weird. That was never a Russell Wilson thing. And I think it just speaks to how much of I wasn't as confident that this was a thing about Peyton, or maybe it was just a Drew Brees thing from all those years with the Saints. Right. But when he comes to Denver and last year does what he does and leads the NFL in running back targets with that quarterback, and then drafts Bo Nix, that's the whole profile, hyper accuracy and willing to take the conservative high percentage throw. It's not that Bo Nix was bad at throwing downfield. It's just that he didn't take risky throws. Right. You could kind of knock him for that a little bit. I know Sean really likes him, says a lot of great stuff about a lot of his efficiency. And I do think that Nix is good and is going to fit really well with Peyton. If you wanted to knock him, you could knock him for being a little bit of a check down Charlie and not taking the opportunities down the field. And yet that's exactly what Sean Payton wants you to do. He wants you to take the high percentage underneath throw to the running backs. It's such a perfect fit. I don't think the way that I wrote it up recently is I'd be shocked if they don't finish top 5 in targets, but I don't just think that they're going to lead the league in targets. I think what's intriguing is last year they led the league with 153 targets. They had seasons with the Saints where they had over 200 running back targets. Like my question is not, do they lead the league at 153? It's, do they have a season where they throw 180 times to the running backs or more? Because their rookie quarterback, they're teaching him not to push it down the field. Like maybe as Bo Nix goes, there's more downfield passing throughout his career. But 2024, first season as a starter, maybe that's the whole thing. That's just a lot of passes to the running backs. It could be really, really intriguing. It's wild that Jaylen Warren's still here, though.
I know.
As much as I love Javonte.
You got me so excited about Javonte. Wow. And Javonte goes, Warren's still on the board. I mean, I think we kind of have to take this value, right?
Yeah, it's a similar thing. The thing I was saying with Javonte is, I love the high value touches, the receptions, all that, is that the volume is going to be stronger for fantasy. We know the reception value is really valuable, even in half PPR. The volume is going to be stronger, more consistent. It pairs well with Jonathan Brooks, who's more of a probably not going to get a lot of volume early in the year, more of a back-weighted spike week type play. But Jaylen Warren's the same type of, textural addition to the running back. I really like this 1-2 with Jonathan Brooks, Jaylen Warren, the same way I would have with Javonte.
Definitely. Yeah, Jaylen Warren's pretty intriguing. I mean, we kind of have well, we're definitely not Arthur Smith fans, so there's always a concern that he's just going to be against whatever we're doing.
Right.
Najee Harris all the touches. Harris is like, this is the one season I can remember where it seems like he might actually be a decent value in a lot of these drafts. But still prefer Warren and his efficiency last year and his pass catching. So
yeah, I've taken Harris once or twice. I've taken a lot more Warren, but they're both priced. I mean, the Arthur Smith stuff concerns me. It concerns me a lot more for George Pickens going in the fourth round, who I have not selected anywhere. I think it's impossible to take him that high. It's wild.
It is. And I mean, I'm a big Pickens fan, but I think, at his price, you just can't even touch him there.
The tight ends you can get and the other stuff you can do in those ranges is just, I just did a show that was about the worst picks in fantasy. And I said Pickens was one of my top worst picks in all of drafts right now. And it is the Arthur Smith thing. Their pass rate over expected last year was the lowest in the league in Atlanta. The year prior, it was even lower, but the Bears were so low in 2022 that they were second lowest that year. But over the last 2 years combined, the lowest. I mean, he's calling the plays now. They're going to run the ball more than they should. Mike Tomlin's always supported, the defense focused mentality. I think they're going to be a run and D team. We just got done talking about Russell Wilson's whole offense last year was about checking down to the running backs. I think he didn't have the rebound that other people seem to think he did. He's not a good quarterback for this system. Fields maybe, but that's not really a big volume play. I just think the running backs is the way if you're going to play the Steelers at all. But yeah, you have to be concerned about the whole offense.
Back on the clock here, we've got Singletary by ADP, Rashid Shaheed, the only wide receiver by ranking. It would be Spears, Chase Brown.
Either of those guys or Singletary. I don't mind taking these guys a little ahead of ADP. Spears at 114 when he's a 117 ADP works, and then maybe we can get Brown on the way back even.
Right.
This is my favorite pocket for these 0 RB builds. You get Spears, you get Brown, you build in some efficiency upside.
Definitely. Going back to what you were saying about Pickens and how bad a pick he is. I mean, he's a guy that obviously, even last year he had a decent season, like over 200 PPR points in not the best situation. Like, how concerned are you that you're just going to be wrong about this situation with Pittsburgh and you still might need some exposure to Pickens?
A little bit. He obviously has the explosive potential. He had the spike week in the playoffs last year, and that's possible. But even that production only landed him as like the wide receiver 26, I think it is, in half PPR. And like he's going like close to that, right? Close to that range. And I think his situation is worse off. It's essentially the case that I would make, that They didn't actually throw very many passes last year, so it's not like I can say that the pass rate stuff is going to be way, way lower for their volume. They were actually, I think, bottom 5 in pass attempts last year. And maybe the efficiency of the pass attempts can actually increase. Maybe I'm missing the boat there, but
yeah.
My concern is the Arthur Smith stuff and the way that he designs offenses, like that they wind up taking deep shots to, Van Jefferson and Quez Watkins and these guys and not Pickens. Like, I think everyone sees Deontay Johnson leave and goes, George Pickens is going to get all the targets. And I'm like, do you guys remember what happened with Drake London and Kyle Pitts the last couple of years?
Yeah.
Like, they were thrown to Jonnu Smith as much as they possibly could. I mean, it's there's a I'm vaguely concerned, but I don't know. I mean, I'm concerned in the way that I'm concerned about any fade. That like, yeah, there's always uncertainty, but
right.
The price to me would have to come down multiple rounds. He's the kind of pick I would want to make. I'm not even like he was good last year, but I'm not that confident George Pickens is like an elite wide receiver. Which if I knew there was an elite wide receiver in this situation, I'm not sure I'd want to take him much higher than where George Pickens is going, right? And so like having a little bit of uncertainty about his actual skill level is leading to some of this take for me. But has been very, very efficient in his first 2 years. And so, I mean, I think he's shown us reason to be excited. I would like to be in on him is what I'm getting at. I don't think I can take him in the 4th round.
Yeah, for sure. Are you at all interested in other pieces of this passing offense like Freiermuth? I say as we get on the clock.
I've gotten vaguely into that. So you got a lot of running backs by your rank. If you click ADP, are there any? Like we only have the 4 receivers at this point.
Yeah, I mean,
no, there's nothing there.
I think some of these guys who are most interesting will get back. We could go Jalen Wright.
I would go Lloyd or Kendre Miller ahead of Wright.
Okay, let's go Lloyd. And
Sharbs are all guys. By ADP, Wright lasts a little bit longer. I do like Jalen Wright.
Good point.
But sometimes you can get Wright a little bit later as well. Lloyd and Kendre Miller have been 2 of my favorites in this range. Kendre Miller, 21-year-old last year, injured season, doesn't do great, but Alvin Kamara completely inefficient, and Jamal Williams somehow worse. He was like 2.9 yards per carry. Like he was, and they didn't add anybody because they still have Williams, they still have Kamara. Kendre Miller's going into his age 22 season. They just used a day 2 pick on him last year, and you can get him in like the 140s, and they literally at this point might be planning for him to just be their starting running back. Right. I think he's definitely going to factor in earlier than people expect. And Lloyd's another good, similar bet where they've talked about they're going to probably use both guys. They really like Lloyd's profile. It's not going to just be all Josh Jacobs. Those 2 dudes are completely mispriced, by my opinion.
Yeah, I agree on that.
Right. The tricky thing is like he's probably the 3rd running back and a backup, and it's like so compelling of a ceiling case if either of the first 2 running backs miss time. I mean, Mostert led the NFL with 21 TDs last year, and then Achane had another 11 next to that. They had 32 TDs between their top 2 running backs. It's a pretty good situation.
Yeah, that's a backfield where you can see them creating enough value for all 3 of those guys, like more value than you could get on other teams for just one guy. So I think you can definitely feel comfortable with Wright.
My worry here, though, is our running backs are like too good. Jonathan Brooks, Jalen Warren, Tyjae Spears, Marshawn Lloyd. We're going to potentially add Jalen Wright here. We only did get the 4 early receivers. That's why I really think it's important in the 2nd, 3rd round to be hitting those receivers, because you can get in a spot where
right.
I do think we should take Wright here because it's going to start to really get thin at running back.
That's true. We can go Wright and basically, call it there for running back. And then there's some late wide receivers that I think are interesting, but this really is a good range to get running backs in. So I'm happy.
We also need to think about QB2.
Right.
What stacks? Do we have any late round quarterback options? Did we take Neighbors on this team?
We didn't.
We didn't get Neighbors.
Didn't take Neighbors. The late round quarterback, I mean, would
be JJ McCarthy.
Right.
So the one thing we could do is look at like those 2 Denver guys you have, Mims and Franklin. If we get either of them, we could play Knicks, right? Yep. If we get the other one is the Patriots. If we can get like Javon Baker, we could play Drake May.
Yep.
So wanting to look at that to address both our receiver depth and QB2 spot together.
I guess there's Brock Bowers, Gardner Minshew possibility, but I don't know. That might be a look then without any actual Raiders receivers.
Yeah, I was really into that earlier, but had someone bring up Aiden O'Connell to me and spent some more time looking at his game logs, and he actually closed the season like fairly well. Right. A lot better than I remembered, especially his last 2 games in week 17 and 18. He had some strong games. They won against Kansas City in week 16, even though he only completed 9 passes. It was like a very run-heavy game. And then the week 15 game was when they put up 63 points on the Chargers. He threw for 4 touchdowns and everything. So certainly looks good in that game. The thing that's concerning for me about that is that when Antonio Pierce took over, one of the first things he did was bench Jimmy Garoppolo and announce Aiden O'Connell would start. And there was all this talk about the locker room was behind Aiden O'Connell. And he started the rest of the year. And then he performed well late in the year. And then they gave Antonio Pierce to start the head coaching job this offseason. They promoted him from interim to the guy. When they brought in Minshew, I was like, well, Minshew played well for the Colts last year. I think he's a higher floor play than people realize. They gave him like decent money, but not a ton of money. And so it's one of those things where it's like, he's not like guaranteed the starter. It could be just like a high-end backup contract, I think. So anyway, I was fairly confident that Minshew would actually start all 17 games until I started thinking through this Aiden O'Connell, Antonio Pierce thing. And now I'm like, man, they're going to play O'Connell some. I think they're going to play him both. I think they're inevitably going to play him both because I don't know if O'Connell can be that good all year, but I think no matter how good Minshew is, they're going to want to get O'Connell some snaps too because I think they like him basically. So
yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
A little bit tricky. Yeah, Minshew got 2 years basically with 2 void years on the back end. He got about 25 million. Oh, he got 15 million fully guaranteed. I mean, that's just not that much for a quarterback. That's like backup quarterback money these days. Like,
right. Yeah, no, that's a good point. I haven't drafted really any Minshew this year, but now I'm kind of glad. All right, so we are back up on the clock. Franklin went a few picks ago. We still have Mims. I think we could go there. We could go Polk. He's kind of the closest by ADP. What do you think?
Yeah, I like the Polk play. I don't love the profile or anything, but by ADP it makes sense. And Drake May's probably a higher ceiling QB2 option. And maybe we can also get Mims, and maybe this should be a 3 quarterback build that has both May and Bo Nix. So by ADP, getting Polk there, a half pick behind his ADP, but Mims is still 19 picks away from his ADP. Maybe we'll be able to get Mims too.
Now, one thing to think about as we're doing this is that Collins and Flowers both have a week 14 bye, as does Polk, as does Mims. So I don't know how significant that is at wide receiver, but something to think about. Because
do any of our wide receivers not have a week 14 bye?
Yeah, right. Jefferson is week 6, right? Oh, great. Jefferson's week 6 and Worthy's week 6. So
got them stacked up too.
We're stacking buys, yeah.
Do we only have 2 wide receivers that don't have a week 14 bye right now?
Yes.
Okay. So we can't even fill a full lineup. That's good. We're doing well. And then the other guy I was going to say is if Mims goes, we could then also take Javon Baker and do a Polk Baker May thing. But again, more week 14 buys. So this is
I think good. Where it gets tricky is that if we did want to do a 3 QB build, we might not want to stack Nix and May, especially both with that week 14 bye.
Oh, because Stroud has a week 14 bye.
Right. Right.
We can't do a Stroud, May, Nix, and do a 3 quarterback build who all have the same bye.
If it weren't week 14, maybe I'd be tempted to try it, but so close to the playoffs, that's going to be tricky.
That's wild.
Yeah, I didn't even notice that at first. All right.
So was there another late stack that you like, or Mims did make it back? I would still take him, and like Wandale's another guy. Like we're gonna still take more receivers because we're still thin. This is
Right,
at
we
least
could
8
do
receiver build.
Wandale and Daniel Jones.
Okay. Let's do oh, yeah. I mean, go ahead. Just take Wandale now. Yeah.
Take
Let's get
Wandale
that
now.
locked in. Yeah,
Don't
that's a good
even
call.
don't
I've
risk
done that a few times in my slows.
Yeah.
Daniel Jones, arguably more upside than any quarterback that late. I mean, it's kind of they've added Malik Neighbors. Like they've done some things.
Right.
And I think people think that he's going to not play 17 games, but certainly a different case than the one I was just making with the Raiders, where in this case, the backup's Drew Lock. And I mean, Drew Lock had one good start last year for the Seahawks, but that brought his total in his career up to one good start. So like, he's not a quarterback that I'm particularly concerned about. If Daniel Jones is playing well, I think Daniel Jones is going to continue to play.
For sure.
And if they go to Drew Lock, I think it's going to be short-lived and they'll go back to Daniel Jones. Like,
yeah. Yeah, we've seen Daniel Jones perform well in some short stints in the NFL. He's got the running ability that does actually help the team win games. Not a ton maybe, but yeah, I think Drew Lock we haven't seen really perform at an NFL level at all. So I'm pretty optimistic for Jones.
The thing about Lock is he started a lot of games for the Broncos. He played quite a bit. I think there's a lot of people out there that are like, well, we just don't really know what he is yet. And it's like, I mean, he played a lot. He showed us that he's not that great. I just pull up his game log. He did have a couple good games with Denver. So I was being a little bit, I was exaggerating a little bit, but certainly not somebody that I think we haven't got enough of a read on. I think we've gotten enough of a read on him and we can be pretty confident that like, it's not a huge risk. Tyrone Tracy just went off. That's another thing I like to do. Like if you take Neighbors early and you get in this kind of spot, you can get Tracy, you can get Wandale. There's a couple different ways to start adding into your Giant stacks. And then Daniel Jones literally will go in the last round. You can just grab Daniel Jones at the very end, which is pretty nice.
His ADP right now, I think, is 17-12. So if we want to maybe grab him in the 17th, we can look at that. JJ McCarthy is the other kind of interesting wide receiver or QB that we could consider in like at 1606.
Yeah, where are you at on him? I don't love his profile, and because they brought in Darnold, and the betting odds actually have Darnold as the favorite to start week 1. Yeah. So I'm just like, I guess that's true for Drake May too, but
right. I think it's probably a similar bet to Drake May. I think the one big difference, of course, is who McCarthy's going to be throwing to if he does get in the game, which obviously elevates not only his floor but also his ceiling. So, in terms of just their pure profiles, probably May is a higher upside bet. But when you consider the team context, I think McCarthy does become pretty intriguing.
That's fair.
Right. We are back on the clock. Mims is still there. I mean, he's even an ADP value here, which I almost never get him at a value because I'm taking him early all the time.
Yeah, we can definitely grab him. We need to keep adding receivers. We're still only at 6, and we've taken Polk and Wandale as our 5 and 6.
I guess the other, we have
receiver build. It's another week 14 bye, but
we're
going to add yet another receiver after this. So.
Yeah, Walker would be the other interesting guy. He's also week 14, so not a big difference there. You have Hyatt, Demario Douglas.
And I'd be a little less interested in Devontae Walker on a team where you already have Zay Flowers. You're kind of betting on a little bit of uncertainty, I think, in their passing game.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Betting against Zay, probably. This is a type of team where you're not going to like this take, but I draft like a DeMarcus Robinson on a team like this because I think he runs routes all year. They really like him as a run blocker. He took over for Tutu Atwell midseason last year for like legitimate reasons and run blocking reasons, but like legitimate real football reasons that they then re-signed him, and they play a lot of 11 personnel. So he stays on the field a ton. If you look at his game log down the stretch, like it's not good, but there's like, usable weeks. And this is the type of one where I'm like, oh, I stacked a bunch of buys. I want a guy who has a different buy, will run a lot of routes, and, has the potential to be usable in some of these games. And it's like, It's fun to just keep drafting the young players, but sometimes you got to draft somebody you know is going to be out there running a lot of routes. Like Mims, I'm at least vaguely concerned about, Troy Franklin and the whole offense and how it functions.
And you're more intrigued by that kind of play versus someone like, I don't know, like Elijah Moore, who maybe is a slightly higher upside bet.
We are back up. Should we take a QB here? We could take May.
You could take May. He's also week 14, same as Stroud.
What if we just take Daniel Jones and then figure out the rookie? Because I don't think we want to take two rookies.
Okay.
In terms of getting enough playing time. I think Daniel
I'm fine with
Jones.
That.
Okay.
Yep. I like that. I think
Daniel Jones is like, we can still do a 3 QB build.
Right.
But so it'd be a 3-5-8-2, but I think you'd want to. It's tough with McCarthy and May or however, Nix. We can now do Nix too. So whether it's May, McCarthy, or Nix.
Right.
Daniel Jones is the key.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think Jones probably more likely to get back to us in 17, but he is kind of more the sure thing on this team. So I think it's more important to get him here.
To your question about Elijah Moore, you asked if I was more intrigued by it, and so then the answer has to be no, because I am not intrigued by DeMarcus Robinson. But I think in terms of specific best ball, it would never happen in season long for me. It would always be Elijah Moore in season long or that type of profile, Devontae Walker, whatever. Yeah. But specifically in best ball, with these types of builds where I've taken a lot of speculative upside, I do think, again, intrigued can't be the word, but whatever the word is, I prefer, because I think it adds something to my build. Somebody where I could feel more confident in the routes and like the volume, even though like I don't even necessarily think DeMarcus Robinson gets a ton of volume. But like I just pulled up his game log. He had 2 10-target games down the stretch for the Rams. He had 2 more 6-target games, including in their playoff game where he played 86% of the snaps. He was playing full time the whole time down the stretch. And then they signed him this offseason and basically told us like we liked him in that role. And Tutu Atwell, by the way, was efficient and productive in the pass game, but he was causing them issues in their run game, right? Like because of the way that they like to use their receivers in the blocking schemes that they do. Right. And so they eventually they started using some Robinson and then eventually went completely away from Tutu, more or less. I think they, rotated him into some like 4 wide receiver sets, but DeMarcus Robinson played full snap shares down the stretch and into the playoffs. And then, like I said, they bring him back. I just feel very confident in that relative to the Elijah Moore thing, where Elijah Moore, like after they brought in Jerry Jeudy, like they might just not use him, right? Like I still think Elijah Moore as a talent is a fun one to bet on, but there's a possibility that they just aren't into it.
That's true. Yeah, no, that's a good point. I guess I'm just trying to think about the scenarios in which they
DeMarcus gave him a $4 million fully guaranteed DeMarcus Robinson. Gave him a $4 million fully guaranteed. You're trying to figure out scenarios in which what?
In which he's the difference maker on a team.
Right.
Maybe that's putting too much pressure on like an 18th round pick, but trying to figure out the scenarios in which he helps you win more often than a guy with kind of the upside of a Moore, or I mean, that's just
we don't have to take him at all.
No, I mean,
as much as we're talking about this, I don't like I don't pound the table for DeMarcus Robinson types. I completely understand what you're saying, but the argument would be if you go look at his game log and half PPR. From week 13 to 17 last year, 5 straight games, he never had more than 17.2 half PPR points, but he never had less than 12.2. Now that's because he ran hot on touchdowns. But like he was giving you usable weeks every week, which is, I think, a notable thing. Did we ever get our third QB?
We did not. So McCarthy went off the board. We
McCarthy
could go Knicks.
And May went. Yeah, let's go Knicks. Let's go Knicks with Marvin Mims. I think that's a fun one. Maybe we could just do a 2 quarterback build, but
on this team we could probably get away with it, but it's too late now.
I like having the 3 stacked quarterbacks. They're all single stacked, but they are all stacked, and that has been shown to be positive in the playoffs in terms of, you know, providing you different one game spike potential. If Mims hits
at week 14 bye with Stroud and Nix, so we'll be really relying on Daniel Jones that week. But that's
hopefully I'm right about Drew Lock, because if I'm not, then Drew Lock might be starting in week 14. Yeah. McCarthy would have been the better fit because of that point,
right?
But and Demarcus Robinson does go there, so and that's fine. Like,
I'm also not pounding the table for Elijah Moore necessarily. That's just kind of the name I picked out. But
to your point, I do think it's for me, it's this thing where I've particularly in best ball, I've started to come around to this idea of, and I'd have to credit my buddy Mike Leone on this. Like, he's done some research on just like usable weeks and stuff like that, where it's what you just said. It's maybe that's putting too much pressure on that pick, because it is best ball. We don't get to replace these picks. And so there is something to be said about like a guy that I feel comfortable is going to run routes for most of the year, have a role in the offense because of the run blocking stuff. It doesn't matter if he's not good, but I don't need to put that pressure on him, specifically because we already took Marvin Mims. We already took Jalen Polk. We already took Wan'Dale Robinson and our earlier picks, Xavier Worthy. Those are the guys that need to be the spike weeks and the difference makers at that point.
Right.
The other player is DJ Chark. If you want to talk about a similar type of pick,
I mean, I
could play a lot for them.
Any Chark this year, but if you feel good about that pick, I'm happy to do it. I'm just looking at what else is an option. I mean, there is Tutu, but
Traylon Burks. Like, I mean, if you want to go,
we could do
pure upside.
Well, we're gonna get Chark.
I'm good with
this guy. I was also thinking maybe Tyler Boyd would fit that kind of mold, but I'm good with Chark here.
I like Chark. I mean, particularly because I'm really concerned about Quentin Johnson after that rookie year. Josh Palmer's solid. I've always been out on Josh Palmer, but had a much better year last year than his first 2 years. He at least took a little bit of a step forward in his peripherals, per route stuff.
Yeah.
But they bring in Chark, who I know Sean's always been a big fan of. And I think, Ladd McConkey is going to be the slot receiver. So you're talking about Palmer, Quentin Johnson, and Chark as kind of the top three outside receivers. And can he get into two receiver sets one way or another? I mean, especially by week 14 when we have all these bye issues, it could just be the case that Quentin Johnson has had such a tough year again that they're not playing him as much or that kind of thing.
Yep, definitely.
It's not going to be a high volume pass game, but they're going to do a lot of play action, vertical stuff. Like, they like to run like deep crossers and stuff in the Harbaugh system. And Justin Herbert's a good quarterback, right? So as far as 18th round receivers go, I mean, there's maybe a little bit of efficiency meat on the bone with DJ Chark, right? Like, I could talk myself into it. I could tell myself a story.
Yeah, I mean, you have them, if that running game is working with if Dobbins is healthy, if they have Gus Edwards scoring touchdowns, you have a lot of play action and a lot of deep passing to guys like Chark and Johnson. Maybe, his rookie season definitely did not give us much confidence in his ability to play that well. So, yeah, I think definitely we could see a surprising season maybe from Chark. All right. The team: Justin Jefferson, Nico Collins, Zay Flowers, Dalton Kincaid, Xavier Worthy, CJ Stroud, Jonathan Brooks, Brock Bowers, Jalen Warren, Tajay Spears, Marshawn Lloyd, Jalen Wright, Jalen Polk, Wan'Dale Robinson, Marvin Mims, Daniel Jones, Bo Nix, and the aforementioned DJ Chark. Ben, how do you like this team that we were able to put together?
There's parts of it that I really like. I think Kincaid Bowers is incredible. I think the running back room is really good. I mean, maybe could use one more running back, particularly now that I'm looking at it when you have Jonathan Brooks and Jalen Wright are guys that I don't think do a lot early in the year for you. But I do think Tajay Spears and Marshawn Lloyd are going to be involved in their offenses right away, and Jalen Warren definitely. So those three guys hopefully carry us through the first 5 weeks, but it might be 5+ weeks before either Brooks or Wright is hitting our lineup. And so that means this should have been a 6 running back build now that I look at it. but I like those 5 running backs a lot. And I like the 2 tight ends. I like when we wound ourselves into a 3 QB build that they're all stacked. And I like our top 4 receivers. The later receivers, like Jalen Polk's a UW guy. I'm from UW. I don't take him a lot. I don't love his ADP. We took him in part for the Drake May thing before we realized the week 14 bye issue, and then we ended up not getting May anyway. Probably would have gave that pick back and used it somewhere else. Wandale I like, Marvin Mims I like, DJ Chark we're talking ourselves into in the 18th round. But that's a back end of a receiving core that I'm more concerned about than most of my builds. Most of the time I have the 5 receivers in the first 8 or 9 rounds, or at least, or 6 receivers by like the 10th or the 11th. And so like looking back on like where we could have done something maybe a little bit different. We talked about the Rashee Rice pick maybe in the 7th. Yeah, there's a suspension looming, but he could have provided some more like legit wide receiver firepower in that late single digit round range. But it's tough. Like I don't want to give back the Jonathan Brooks pick, and I don't want to give back the Brock Bowers pick or the Jalen Warren pick. And so that's where you start to realize like that's the payoff to or the trade-off to taking Kincaid early, which I don't want to give back either, but also taking Stroud, who we end up getting as a faller. But when you do the early QB, even in a 0 RB build where you did an early tight end as well, you run out of you don't get enough of the early wide receiver depth as you maybe want to at the end. So that's the part of it that I don't think this team is like screwed, but I do think if I look at it and I'm like, how do I reverse engineer a better team for next time? I think I want to find ways to do more in the early part with wide receiver.
Right. We did end up with a 3 QB build, but when you're looking at guys we could have taken instead of Nix or Jones, it's not as significant for the team as if we had waited on Stroud there and instead taken a JSN or an Addison or something. That would have been a way.
Right.
Obviously, then we have to address quarterback later, but I think you can talk yourself. I mean, you don't even have to talk yourself into some of these later guys instead of Polk, for instance.
Yeah, we get the great value on Stroud, and I think it was right to take him, and I'm glad we took him because there's some real enticing upside cases for Stroud. But it is interesting when you say that, like if we hadn't taken Stroud there, say he would have went off the board and Kittle was off the board, we take JSN.
Yeah.
And then instead of one of our late receivers, we take like May in our, so we wind up with a 3 QB build that's like extreme late round QBs. It's May, Bo Nix, and Daniel Jones. Like that's tricky because May and Bo Nix, I think Nix is a pretty good bet to start week 1, but there's a possibility that both those rookies wouldn't even start week 1. But say you like, I think I maybe like that more, to have 3 late round QBs in the 3 QB build if they were all stacked. If we, and then we could trade off the Stroud thing but I still liked the Stroud pick at the time, and I'm glad we made it because I do think he's really good too. It's just, when you think through structurally and the other rooms that you're in where you don't get the opportunity for this 14 pick value that we got on Stroud. Yeah. That's one of the huge things that it can provide. And the late round stuff, like you said, you don't even have to talk yourself into some of these guys. Like the Daniel Jones price is ridiculous.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I guess the way it could have played out would have been like, instead of Stroud, we take Smith and Jigba, and then in the 14th, maybe we take Geno. So you're looking at a different stack that, definitely Geno doesn't have even close to the upside of Stroud. So you do have to kind of weigh those two things against each other. And it's not necessarily clear that you would prefer JSN and Geno over Stroud, but but it is an interesting thought experiment. The other thing would be like Addison instead of Stroud, and then we kind of definitely get McCarthy and we have Jefferson and Addison. That could have been interesting too, but
for sure. The really interesting part of it is a draft where we had some falling value in round 2 by ADP at running back. And we went, and in round 3, we took Zay Flowers well ahead of ADP. We went receiver. So this is a draft we're talking about where we went receiver. We did take a tight end in 4 and then took a receiver in 5.
Yeah.
Top 3 rounds are a receiver, 4 of the top 5. and we're still trying to talk through where we could have fit in another receiver in the top 10 rounds, which. And I think you're right. It's not immediately clear whether going Stroud where we did or going, JSN with some Geno later would have worked or
Right.
like those are all the areas that in different drafts, your draft can take a different type of structure or texture. But what we're not discussing is having, a running back in round 2, right? Like what we are not discussing is changing the build so substantial or a running back in the dead zone, right? Like we are okay with the Jonathan Brooks pick in 7, although I probably wouldn't. That's if I was giving one back, it probably would be to take Rashee Rice or Deontay Johnson there, and then take a running back on the back end where we took like Wandale or whatever. Like there's some running backs in the later, the double digit rounds that make a lot of sense. Frankly, still like running back's the one position that I'm fine taking every round through round 18. I mean, there's always like something that I'm okay with. I'm like, all right, I can tell myself a little story about this. Like.
Right.
So,
I mean, it's interesting. We got 5 running backs on this team, and you do come away thinking, okay, this running back room is maybe a little bit thin just because there's a lot of rookies that won't necessarily give us production to start the season. But we also think the wide receiver room is thin in that we don't have as many of the early kind of the tier that can break into like round 2 next year.
Yep.
So it really, I don't know what exactly accounts for that, but I do think that CJ Stroud pick, even though it was a good pick and we got a value on him, that's one that you can immediately point to and say, well, that really kept us from executing some other plans that we might have wanted to do. Maybe Kincaid is the other one there, but I really like that pick too. So yeah, it's tricky.
It's definitely tricky. I think it's probably a combination of. I don't think it's Kincaid. I think it's a combination of the Stroud pick, and then if you take a QB early, you have to push 0 RB past the 7th round. Like it's a combination of Stroud and Jonathan Brooks. Like
that makes sense.
Take a QB in 6, you got to hit a receiver in 7 still, and also because we were willing to take Bowers ahead of ADP in 8 and not try to get like an ADP value on him in 9, which I mean. Arguably in 8, you can consider like, Cortland Sutton still or something, which I'm sure you're not as into. Another one of those boring veterans that I'm willing to take because it's like, I mean, I don't want to be taking Jalen Polk in the 13th round. You know what I mean? I want to be taking a running back there.
Right. It's tricky. I mean, well, like you don't want to be taking guys like Jalen Polk. I don't want to be taking guys like Cortland Sutton. You really have to get all your wide receivers pretty early to come up with a team that you really feel confident in. So just goes to show the importance of 0 RB this year. After
that Jalen Polk pick, if you scroll down, I mean, I see Tyrone Tracy went after that.
Yep.
Kamani Vidal went earlier than him in the same round. Ty Chandler was on that turn. He's a guy that I think is going to play actually more than people think, and also has some contingent upside. Ray Davis went after that pick. I'm sure Bucky Irving. Yeah, he goes all the way in the 16th. Love Bucky. Both the Bears backups, Khalil Herbert and Roschon Johnson, I think you can make different types of positive arguments for. That's going to be a good offense. Like I really like the receivers for the Bears. And DeAndre Swift's never been a super healthy lead back. I do like Swift's price too, frankly. I think the Bears running backs are all draftable. But that's a bunch of names I just named off that are all like in this draft, they all went in the 4th. Vidal was in the 13th, but the rest of them were 14, 15, or 16.
Right.
Which is after we took Polk, which is when we were taking Robinson, Marvin Mims, Daniel Jones. I don't think those receivers aren't helpful, but I do think those running backs can add more to a 0 RB build than those receivers really make up for in a wide receiver build, like what you had not taken early. So,
yeah, giving back probably this Brooks pick and getting Rice or Deontay there. I mean, obviously there's some risk with Rashee Rice, but you see, if the suspension's not as bad as we're expecting, then he immediately jumps up into this top tier. So so that would have been a pretty interesting way to play it, and then maybe two running backs in this 14 to 16 range.
Right.
But
couple rookies, Bucky and Tracy or whoever.
That would have been fun.
Cool. This is a good team still, though. I mean, it's not done. There's a lot of stuff to like about it too.
Yeah, I mean, Polk, that's a wide open wide receiver depth chart. If May is as good as some people think, he could definitely make a jump. I mean, I think there's buzz about Wandale really even competing with Neighbors for kind of top in the pecking order, although I don't necessarily see him doing that. But yeah, I'm pretty excited about a lot of these guys, where I can at least talk myself into a lot of them.
For sure. I think the Knicks Mims thing makes a lot of sense too. If you're banking on a Mims breakout, I think you like Knicks. I think those are both correlated upside bets in rounds 15 and 17. Like if you can find a way to make those bets directionally, correlated, then that's nice. That's helpful.
For sure. All right, awesome. Well, thanks so much, Ben, for hopping on. What do you have going on that the people should know about?
Stealing Signals newsletter, Stealing Bananas on the RotoViz radio airwaves, ship chasing with Pat Crane and Pete Overzet. And then I started a new solo YouTube channel, the Stealing Signals YouTube channel, just last week, and I've done several streams like this one. So go subscribe to that. I'm trying to grow that.
Definitely, yeah. If you're not following Ben's work, you're doing something wrong. He's one of the top minds in the industry and one of my favorite writers and people. So make sure you're following all of his stuff. Make sure you're subscribed to all of his channels and newsletters. Subscribe to the RotoViz YouTube channel and podcast feeds and everything to get all of the, not only Stealing Bananas, but all the work we're doing on the best ball side as well. And thank you for tuning in.